Ladies and gentlemen, it is 3 a.m. when I'm recording this video. I have to drive 5 hours tomorrow, but that doesn't matter because we need to get out this week 3 start and sit wide receiver video by Friday night at the latest for you guys. All I'm asking in return is for you to hit that subscribe button. If you're not already, drop a thumbs up on this video at the end if you did enjoy. We're getting right into it with the Colts versus the Ravens. I am starting Michael Pittman Jr., sitting Alec Pierce, sitting Josh Downs, starting Zay Flowers, sitting Rashad Bateman, and sitting Odell Beckham Jr. Starting it off with Michael Pittman Jr. here on the Colts. He started off the season very hot so far. 23.7 PPR fantasy points in week number 1. In week 2, 13.6 PPR fantasy points, both eclipsing over 10 targets in each of these games. He's developing a nice little connection with Anthony Richardson right now. He is the clear number 1 wide receiver on this team right now. Also, a negative that I saw in Michael Pittman Jr. last season was that he wasn't running too many deep routes. This year, things have been changing, all right? He's running more downfield routes, which opens up his potential that much more. Now, in this matchup against the Ravens, I don't love it by any means, but he's going to get his targets yet again. Look for him to get around those 10 targets every single game here going forward. He needs that volume to be fantasy relevant on a week-to-week basis. As for Alec Pierce goes, he's only had 3 catches so far this year, not showing any value just yet. Even though he played every single offensive snap in the last game and ran more routes than Michael Pittman Jr., he's clearly not getting enough separation, not getting targeted enough in this offense. And for Josh Downs, I'm still waiting to see really what he can do. He is not fantasy startable just yet here. Next up, we have Zay Flowers on the Baltimore Ravens. He is a start in my opinion. He's seeing a crazy number of offensive snaps and targets, especially in his rookie year in his first 2 games. Game number 1, he had 10 targets. Game number 2, the targets took a backseat here because Mark Andrews was finally back from that injury. That's not surprising to us whatsoever. Going forward, I would expect Zay Flowers to be the number 2 option in this offense. Also, the Colts are ranking 31st against the pass this year, so a great matchup for Flowers, definitely starting him. As for Rashad Bateman goes, I am sitting him, even though the matchup is good. With Andrews and Flowers just dominating the target share, I don't think there's really a place for Bateman at the moment. Sure, he'll have those games where he goes off, maybe scores a touchdown or 2, but on a week-to-week basis, I'm just not comfortable with it. He has just 3 targets in both of his games so far. That needs to be higher. For a guy like Rashad Bateman, we don't know what he can do, but he's a young, talented player. It just needs more targets. I'm not quite sure that he's going to get that in week number 3, though. As for Odell Beckham Jr., the same situation that we just talked about. Not enough targets to go around right now for the other people on this team. As for the Titans and the Browns game, Tennessee Titans, I am sitting DeAndre Hopkins. I am sitting Treylon Burks and sitting Nick Westbrook-Akine. On the Cleveland side of things, I am starting Amari Cooper, I'm starting Elijah Moore, and I am sitting Donovan Peoples-Jones in this matchup. All right, starting it off with DeAndre Hopkins. He's going up against the second best passing defense in the league so far this year. Denzel Ward has been locked down in weeks 1 and 2 so far. I don't think he really has too many problems here with Hopkins this week. Hopkins, going into this year, we all knew he was well past his prime. He needs a massive target share to stay fantasy viable. I don't know if he sees that much action in this game against the Browns. I don't know if he's going to be throwing. I don't know if Ryan Tannehill is going to be throwing Denzel Ward's way too much in this one. As for Treylon Burks, I normally love the player. I love him for his big play potential on a week-to-week basis. I think he becomes fantasy relevant very soon as a flex play. Just not this week. I'm not liking the matchup, like I said. He had a nice game last week, though. All right, not enough targets right now for me to say that he's a viable flex play option, though. Last but not least, for the Tennessee Titans, Nick Westbrook-Akine is also a sit. He caught a touchdown last week against one of the worst passing defenses in the Los Angeles Chargers. This matchup is totally different, like I've been saying. Not a fan here of Westbrook-Akine. On the opposite side of the ball, we have Amari Cooper on the Cleveland Browns. He is a start for me all day of the week here. This is a battle of opposites, all right? Tennessee ranks 30th against the pass this year currently. Cooper should have no problem having a good fantasy viable day here. Also, Elijah Moore, I am starting him as well. I thought we would see a little bit more from Elijah Moore early on this season. Not that he's playing horrible by any means, but we were promised a lot in the offseason. We were promised that he was going to get a lot of targets, be heavily involved in this offense. I have seen them using him in the backfield a couple times, which is nice, but I need to see him get more work, and I think it starts here in this week. I wouldn't drop Elijah Moore just yet if he's sitting on your bench. Then Donovan Peoples-Jones, I would be sitting him. The addition of Elijah Moore this offseason has really destroyed his value from last year. He was a fantasy viable option. It was no beating around the bush last season, but this year he just has 2 catches in this season so far. Pretty self-explanatory. He is not fantasy viable right now. Next up, the Broncos and the Dolphins. I am starting Jerry Jeudy, sitting Courtland Sutton, sitting Brandon Johnson, starting Tyreek Hill, starting Jalen Waddle, and sitting Braxton Berrios. Jerry Jeudy, I'm expecting him to get better week after week after week. Every week that he plays from that hamstring injury that he was just coming back with in week 2. Obviously, he had 5.5 PPR fantasy points in week 2. Not a great performance by any means, but I'm not looking into it that much here. This matchup against the Dolphins isn't the greatest in the world, but I do see Jeudy being a focal point in this offense heading forward. I would not trade him yet. I would not be panicking on Jeudy. I would definitely start him against the Dolphins this week. Could be a high-scoring game, to be honest with you guys. As for Courtland Sutton goes, I think he is also a start, especially in deeper leagues. I'm not the biggest fan of starting him in 10-person leagues, but 12 and up, I think he's a solid option. Most of his catches last week came late in the game against the Commanders. The Commanders had that crazy comeback, which allowed the Denver Broncos to pass the ball late in the game, which they probably normally wouldn't have done. I think he's going to be relevant in certain games this year. He's going to be a little bit matchup dependent. The Dolphins in this one especially are going to give up a good amount of points. All right, this is not going to be a low-scoring affair by any means. Xavier Howard should also be covering Jerry Jeudy for the most part in this game. So Courtland Sutton will have his opportunities. We just got to see if he'll take advantage of them. Last but not least, Brandon Johnson on the Broncos. He had a long touchdown catch last week that was just boosting the crap out of his numbers drastically. It was a long Hail Mary tip drill that he caught in the end zone. So I'm not expecting much from Brandon Johnson this week. On the opposite side of the ball, Tyreek Hill, potential number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. No doubt start every single week right here. Jalen Waddle is also a start in my opinion. Dealing with that concussion from last game here, if he does pass protocol, I don't really know how you sit Jalen Waddle on a week-to-week basis, but he hasn't practiced all week up to Friday, so keep that in the back of your mind if you have him rostered. As for Braxton Berrios goes, he doesn't see enough targets on this team. Even if Jalen Waddle sits out in this game, I'm not comfortable starting Braxton Berrios here. Next up, we have the Falcons and the Lions. The Falcons, Drake London. I am probably going to regret this, but I'm going to say start Drake London, sit Mac Hollins, sit Scott Miller, start Amon-Ra St. Brown, start Josh Reynolds in deeper leagues, and sit Marvin Jones Jr. All right, so let's start it off with the most controversial take by far in this section of the video, Drake London being started. Now, I'm probably going to regret this most likely. This might be the 3 a.m. brain creeping in on me. I'm going to take the risk and start Drake London here, which means he's definitely going to get 1.8 PPR fantasy points. You can book that. It's 100% guaranteed. Every time I feel like I say Drake London is going to do good, he barely gets the ball. So, if you want to fade me, I totally understand it. The Falcons, we need to see them throw the ball more, man. All right. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, both insanely talented receivers. I mean, Pitts is a tight end, obviously, but they just have been preferring Bijan and Algier up to this point so far. Is that going to continue on Sunday? Probably, but Drake London could find the end zone again. You never know. As for Mac Hollins and Scott Miller, I don't think there is any room for them in this offense. The passing volume isn't even enough for a number 1 wide receiver and a number 1 tight end on this team to thrive. So I think there's no chance that you're starting these two, especially if you're considering not even starting Drake London in that offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown on the opposite side of the ball. He is a must start in my opinion, drafted as the 2nd round fantasy pick for you probably, or even the 1st round fantasy pick in some leagues. He is the number 1 wide receiver on this high-powered Lions offense. Now, A.J. Terrell on the opposite side of the ball for the Falcons is a good cornerback. Don't get me wrong. I would lower expectations just a bit here, but I would still be playing Amon-Ra here in week 3. Josh Reynolds has been quietly putting up good numbers through the first 2 weeks here. Week 1, he scored 12.0, And week 2, he scored at 23.6 in PPR leagues with 2 touchdowns last week. All right. He's getting enough targets, averaging 6.5 per game so far. I think it's good enough for a flex play, especially in those deeper leagues. And then we have Marvin Jones Jr., just 2 catches so far on the year. I would rather play Josh Reynolds or even Khalif Raymond over him if it got down to that point. So definitely not starting Marvin Jones Jr. Saints and Packers, starting Chris Olave, starting Michael Thomas, starting Rashid Shaheed in deeper leagues here. I am sitting every Green Bay receiver, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed this week. Number 1, Chris Olave. This is a tough matchup here, but you have to start him every single week, in my opinion. There is no better receiver on this team right now. Although, number 2 here, Michael Thomas, also a start, has looked good through the first 2 weeks. There's no denying it. He's running just as many routes and playing just as many snaps as Chris Olave is. I think he's a solid flex play going forward, as long as the volume continues to be there. And then last but not least, on this same offense, Rashid Shaheed. I think Shaheed is worth the risk in deeper leagues simply due to that huge play potential that he possesses. Now, I do want to see more passes go his way on a week-to-week basis. The only problem is that all 3 of these guys are very good receivers, so it might be a little bit of a target share issue, not really a talent issue there in New Orleans. On the Green Bay side of things, you might be wondering why I'm not starting any of these guys. Listen, Christian Watson, we'll start it off there. You're going to have to wait another week, in my opinion, to start this guy. He hasn't practiced all week, first of all. Let's start right there. This could be, if he does play, his first week back from taking the first 2 weeks of the season off due to a just random hamstring injury that basically came out of nowhere heading up to week 1, which is definitely concerning that could linger on. I would play it a little bit patient. Okay, the Saints also have a solid defense in this matchup. Packers might struggle in this game. As for Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed go, it's kind of a toss-up. Okay, 2 touchdowns from Doubs in week 1, 2 from Reed in week 2. What can we really expect here? There's a big question mark in my mind. Who is going to take over as that wide receiver 2? I'm talking about when Christian Watson comes back into that offense. Who's the wide receiver 1 when Christian Watson is not in the offense? We don't have a concrete answer just yet. So if you want to take the gamble and play one of these guys, be my guest. But personally, I'd be sticking them on the bench until we get a little more clarification on the matter. Next up, Chargers and the Vikings. I am starting Keenan Allen, starting Mike Williams, sitting Josh Palmer, starting Justin Jefferson, starting Jordan Addison. And in deeper leagues, I am starting KJ Osborne even. Okay, starting it off with Keenan Allen. This game should be a shootout, and Keenan Allen has looked tremendous through the first 2 weeks. You are more than happy if you drafted Keenan Allen in your fantasy football league. 14.2 in week number 1, and then exploded with 31.1 in week number 2. You wouldn't even know that this guy is 31 years old at this point. He is playing out of his mind right now. Minnesota also has one of the worst passing defenses in the league. You wouldn't really know it from last Thursday because DeAndre Swift ran for 175 yards against them. Absolutely slaughtered that defense, but it's going to catch up to him. Okay, you'll see soon how bad this pass defense is for the Vikings. And that leads us to Mike Williams, who is the deep threat guy here for Justin Herbert in this offense. He played good last week, and I expect that to definitely continue here. Did I mention to you guys that the over-under in this matchup is 53.5, which is insanely high. That's the highest over-under that we've seen yet this season. So they're expecting, or Vegas is expecting a lot of scoring in this matchup. Josh Palmer, he's holding off Quentin Johnston so far as the number 3 wide receiver on this team. But although he's doing that, he's not providing much value fantasy-wise. On the opposite side of the ball in Minnesota, Justin Jefferson, not going to talk about this whatsoever. He should have a crazy game against a bad Chargers defense that can't stop anybody right now. Next up, Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison is looking great so far, especially for a rookie. That's why I'm starting him in week number 3 here. All I want to see, though, is more passes heading his way. The only reason I can't really complain about this is because Kirk Cousins has Justin Jefferson on the team. If it was almost any other receiver in the league, I might have some question marks as to why Jordan Addison isn't getting as many targets. It's Justin Jefferson and it's TJ Hawkinson taking those targets away, and it's understandable. All that being said, this is a matchup where, like I said, it's insanely favorable, and I expect it to be very high scoring. So I could still see Jordan Addison having a good fantasy day. And also, KJ Osborne in those deeper leagues, 12, 14, 16-man leagues especially, I would consider Osborne as a start in the flex spot. It's never a bad idea to bet on the highest scoring game of the week. Maybe KJ Osborne catches a couple strays in this matchup. Next up, we got the Patriots and the Jets. I am sitting every receiver in this matchup. We're going to talk about everything right now. Let's get to it. Devontae Parker starting off. Now, he's dealing with a knee injury currently, which is turning me off just a little bit. This is the lowest scoring projected total of the entire week at 36.5 points. So Vegas is not expecting a lot of points to be had, not a lot of action in this game, and I could see why. These teams both have good defenses. Going forward, I think Devontae Parker clears Juju as the #1 wide receiver and also Kendrick Bourne, but right now with that injury lingering, I'm just not seeing him having a good game in this one. As for Juju, Patriots so far aren't a big fan of Juju. Okay, he hasn't lived up to that #1 role that he was supposed to take over. At least a lot of people thought so in the offseason in New England. Also, the catches he is getting, there's just nothing happening after the catch. He's not going anywhere on these passes. Kendrick Bourne is an interesting one. He had a big week 1 followed by a big stinker in week number 2. He will be viable if the Pats fall down in matchups early, but in this game against the Jets, that really shouldn't happen, so he's a sit. Now, this one I might get some hate for. Okay, Garrett Wilson, if he's on your team, you're probably thinking, I got to start Garrett Wilson. There's no way I bench Garrett Wilson in this matchup. I would be searching all over on every team for a trade for Garrett Wilson right now if you can still get any value out of him. He had 2 catches on 8 targets last week, which was absolutely miserable. Saved his week on a 68-yard long touchdown pass. If he doesn't catch that ball, he ends with 2.0 PPR fantasy points, which would be disgusting. Also, Christian Gonzalez on the Patriots is playing out of his mind right now. He looks great. So I'd definitely be worried about Garrett Wilson. Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb, by the way, if I don't trust the #1 best wide receiver on this team, I'm not trusting Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb to perform in this matchup at all. Now we got the Bills and the Commanders. I am starting Stephon Diggs, sitting Gabe Davis, sitting Trent Sherfield, starting Terry McLaurin, starting Jahan Dotson in deeper leagues only, and sitting Curtis Samuel. Stephon Diggs, first off, must start A-tier wide receiver every single week going forward. As for Gabe Davis, he is a sit in my opinion. He is a very hit or miss receiver, very similar to a guy like DJ Moore or Mike Williams, just a little bit less talented than both those guys, I would say. I don't know if you guys will agree with me there, but at least that's what I think. Listen, we said he was a great play last week against Las Vegas, and he played a solid game, but that's Las Vegas. This week, playing a much tougher Washington Commanders defense, he just lacks the consistency week after week to start him. I think he struggles in this matchup. And then as for Trent Sherfield, he's not getting enough looks with Diggs and Gabe Davis. And also, the Buffalo Bills seem to really like Dawson Knox still and Dalton Kincaid. So Sherfield is not seeing enough action here to be startable. As for the Washington Commanders side of the ball, I love Terry McLaurin. He had a nice recovery in week number 2. Shows that we can chalk up week number 1 to that turf toe injury. He was still getting bothered by it just a little bit in that one. Now that he's back to 100%, he should lead this team in targets going forward. Jahan Dotson, I would be starting him in deeper leagues only. Honestly, I'm going to be real with you guys. I'm really disappointed so far in what Dotson has done. He was my sleeper pick at the beginning of the year to finish as a top 25 wide receiver in all of fantasy football. Do I still think that could happen? Of course. All right, but he's just not getting enough looks right now. He's playing the most snaps and running the most routes on the team, but not getting enough looks. I really don't understand. Last 2 weeks, he started out with a quick catch or two in the first couple of drives and then gets ignored by Sam Howell the rest of the game. So as of right now, I think he's only worth playing in those deeper leagues just in case they decide to force feed him one of these games. But like I said, he's getting the snap share and he's running enough routes to where he shouldn't be this ineffective in the offense for much longer. Curtis Samuel is the last one up here. I think he is a sit this week. Sam Howell is spreading the ball so evenly between everybody else except Terry McLaurin that it's really just tough to play anybody except him right now. Although Curtis Samuel did play very well to start the season so far. So I would keep him on your radar as a waiver wire pickup potentially going forward in these next couple of weeks. Next up, we have the Texans versus the Jaguars. I am starting Nico Collins. I am starting in deeper leagues only Robert Woods and Tank Dell. On the opposite side of the ball, I'm starting Calvin Ridley, starting Christian Kirk, and sitting Zay Jones. Nico Collins right now was the sleeper pick in fantasy of the year. All right, he was not expected to do this good. All right, he was expected to be the #1 wide receiver in Houston at the beginning of the year, but he is putting up far better numbers than anybody could have expected. Right now, currently, he is sitting as the #6 wide receiver in PPR leagues in fantasy football. If his target share keeps up like it has been through the first 2 weeks, I like him again against the Jaguars here in this game. As for Robert Woods and Tank Dell goes, if they're going to keep getting, if CJ Stroud is going to keep throwing the ball 40 to 50 times per game, I have no problem starting either of these guys in your deeper league formats. The opposite side of the ball, Calvin Ridley. Ridley should bounce back from a tough week #2 performance against the Kansas City Chiefs. That was supposed to be an insanely high-scoring game. Turns out both defenses just showed up to play in this one, and it did not pan out like we expected at all. If he doesn't catch more than 2 passes this week, we got a real problem about Calvin Ridley. All right, we got to talk about if that week 1 was a fluke or not. I'm still leaning like it wasn't a fluke. Okay, I still think Ridley is going to perform well the rest of the season. I'm not worried too much just yet. As for Christian Kirk goes, he is a start in my opinion, although I don't think he's going to be seeing 14 targets every single game. But last week, he was definitely reassuring for sure to know that the Jaguars knew that he didn't see enough action in week 1 and force-fed him the ball, made it a point to get him involved in this offense in week #2. We need to see a balance here. We need to see about 7-8 targets for Ridley and 7-8 targets for Kirk. These guys could be a nasty 1-2 punch if they get on the same page here in this offense. And then Zay Jones is a sit in my opinion. That knee injury is still lingering for him. He hasn't practiced yet this week. Also, this could be a game where Houston has a bad run defense. We know this. ETN could have a great game, and they could lean on him a lot later in this matchup. Now we got the Panthers and the Seahawks. I am sitting every Panthers receiver, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and Jonathan Mingo. I am starting DK Metcalf, starting Tyler Lockett, and sitting JSN in this matchup. All right, we're going to start it off with Adam Thielen. Now, Bryce Young has barely had any time in the pocket, while Thielen has been his favorite target through the first 2 weeks. All right, I'm not comfortable starting any Panthers players so far. That includes DJ Chark, who had 1 catch in his return from his injury. Wasn't too promising to see. Although, I do have to say, although I'm not starting Jonathan Mingo in this upcoming week, I would keep him on your radar. He is currently seeing the most snaps and the most routes run on this team. Could be a waiver wire ad in the near future here. DK Metcalf hasn't practiced yet this week for the Seahawks. If he returns on Friday, it would suggest that he leans towards playing. I don't think there's many weeks that you can sit DK if you have him on your team, so I'm starting him. Tyler Lockett, if DK misses this game, he is a must-start option for you as your wide receiver 2. I'd be probably even comfortable playing him in your wide receiver 1 position, although you probably don't need to. All right. Great week #2 performance out of him, catching 2 touchdowns and redeeming that week 1 super slow start that he had, about 3 fantasy points, I think it was. Tyler Lockett is always a consistent option, all right, for the most part. All right, that week 1, we'll chalk it up to a fraud. All right, that was a outlier week for Tyler Lockett and the Seahawks. As for JSN goes, I'm waiting a couple more weeks to play him. Not really too comfortable if DK and Lockett are on the field that Jackson Smith and Jigba gets enough targets in this matchup to be fantasy viable. I will say he'll probably score around 10 points. Okay, I'm not expecting him to drop a fat dud, but I'm not expecting him to go off and win you your fantasy week by any means. Now we have the Bears against the Chiefs. I am starting DJ Moore, sitting Darnell Mooney, sitting Chase Claypool. Kansas City side of things, I am sitting all these wide receivers. DJ Moore, first off, is a very hit or miss wide receiver, very similar to Mike Williams and Gabe Davis, as we talked about earlier in this video. This game against the Chiefs is expected to be high scoring. I think he can get away with starting DJ Moore in this matchup, although the Chiefs-Jags game last week was supposed to be high scoring and the Chiefs offense did not show up yet again. So we'll have to see what happens in this one. I am sitting Darnell Mooney and I am sitting Chase Claypool. I don't think there is enough passing volume to go around right now for these two. Also, Justin Fields looks horrible throwing the ball throughout these first 2 weeks. Onto the Kansas City side of things, I am not starting any of these guys. Like I said, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is probably the most consistent guy on this team receiver-wise. If we're not talking about Travis Kelce, who is clearly the number one option, and he will be going forward all season. Sky Moore had a little bit of a bounce-back game, redeemed some value that he lost in week number 1, lost some trust from a lot of people, maybe gained a little of that back, scoring 10 fantasy points. And then Kadarius Toney actually didn't drop any balls this week, so that was good. He caught 5 passes, which was a nice little change of pace from week number 1, where he was talking. He was still talking trash after that game to Giants fans. I don't really understand it, but okay, Kadarius Toney. He had a little redemption there. I'll give him that. Cowboys against the Cardinals. I am starting CeeDee Lamb, starting Brandon Cooks, sitting Michael Gallup, starting Marquise Brown, sitting Michael Wilson, and sitting Rondale Moore. CeeDee Lamb looks like a stud. All right, he struggled in week number 1. He didn't even really struggle. He had 77 yards, 4 catches, 11.7 PPR fantasy points. This was just because it was a blowout game. That's the same reason that Brandon Cooks struggled. I'm starting both of them in this matchup against. Listen, the Cardinals have played a lot better than I've expected through 2 weeks, but the Cowboys have a great defense, so I don't think they're going to be on the field too much, which means CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks should thrive in this matchup. As for Michael Gallup, he has not done anything through 2 games to suggest that he is worth starting right now in fantasy. On the opposite side of the ball, Arizona Cardinals, Marquise Brown had a great week number 2. I think he is the only viable starter on this team going forward, although this is a very tough matchup, even though Cowboys just lost Diggs for the entire year with that ACL injury. Prayers up to Diggs. That's absolutely brutal to see. Marquise Brown, I think, is a startable option in this game. Michael Wilson, Rondale Moore, not seeing enough action at this moment to start these guys. Although Michael Wilson is a solid fantasy waiver pickup heading forward, I will say that. Steelers against the Raiders. On the Pittsburgh side of things, I am starting George Pickens and sitting Allen Robinson and Calvin Austin. Las Vegas side of things, I'm starting Devontae Adams, starting Jacoby Myers, and sitting Hunter Renfrow. George Pickens, nice long touchdown last week, finally starting to connect a little bit with Kenny Pickett, although Pickett doesn't look like we would expect him to. He needs that year 2 jump up, all right? He's not really seeing it just yet. He needs to really focus on having Pickens as his number 1 wide receiver here. He is the best option for him, 100%. Allen Robinson, I'm sitting him. Like I said this in a couple videos ago, a lot of people wanted to pick up Allen Robinson off the waivers. I just think he was a one-off. He's done this a lot of seasons. He'll have a fantasy viable game. Not an amazing performance by any means, but a game to just let you know he is available on waivers. So you go to pick him up and then he drops a dud the next 5 weeks. All right, I'm not confident in Allen Robinson. Calvin Austin is more promising, I'll say, than Allen Robinson, but not in this matchup. As for the Las Vegas side of things, Devontae Adams is a must start every single week. He is good to go from that concussion protocol. Does not have one, which is a good sign. And then Jacoby Myers is also coming back from injury. Had a massive week 1 performance. Expecting more of the same in this one against a Steelers defense that is actually struggling this year so far. Last but not least, Hunter Renfrow hasn't been doing anything this year, so definitely not starting him. Definitely not starting Hunter Renfrow. I was expecting more from Hunter Renfrow, to be totally honest with you. I think he was in one of our before the season waiver wire ad videos just for the potential that he could reclaim his role from 2021 when he played very well, but he hasn't shown any of the same this year. Eagles and the Buccaneers. I am starting A.J. Brown, starting Devontae Smith, sitting Quez Watkins. On the Tampa side of things, I'm starting Mike Evans, starting Chris Godwin, and sitting Trey Palmer. Really nothing to talk about here in this matchup. A.J. Brown is going to bounce back sooner or later, and I think this is a great matchup for him to do so. Devontae Smith has been killing it through these first 2 weeks. I expect more of the same here, even though he did get added to the injury report. So just keep that in mind heading into Monday night here. Quez Watkins, You know, he catches a long touchdown here and there, but he's not fantasy relevant at the moment. And on the opposite side of the ball, Mike Evans has been killing it for the first 2 weeks here. Loving what we're seeing out of Mike Evans if you drafted him so far. I do think he is a sell high candidate, but there's no saying that he's going to fall off anytime soon. So I'm definitely starting him in this matchup against the Eagles secondary. Listen, the Eagles defensive line is much better than their secondary right now. So Evans should thrive in this matchup, as well as Chris Godwin. Although it seems like Baker Mayfield has a better connection with Mike Evans than Chris Godwin so far this season, which is surprising to me. That being said, I'm still probably not benching Chris Godwin at this point in time. And then Trey Palmer hasn't been getting really too much action to be fantasy relevant. So he is a sit in my opinion. Last but not least, final matchup of the week on Monday night, second game, Rams against the Bengals. I am starting Puka Nacua, starting Tutu Atwell, sitting Van Jefferson, starting Jamar Chase, starting T. Higgins, and sitting Tyler Boyd. Puka Nacua, it's just 20 targets last week, 15 catches. That's ridiculous usage. You have to play this guy no matter what team he goes against right now. If you can trade him off before Cooper Kupp gets back on the field, I think it is a solid option. I saw somebody talking about a trade between Puka Nacua and Jamar Chase almost straight up. Do that all day of the week. Take Jamar Chase. Take the chance that Puka falls off throughout the course of the year. At least a little bit. He's not going to be the quality of Jamar Chase. I'm betting on it right now. If he is, we're seeing a superstar in the making. Okay. Next up, Tutu Atwell. I am starting him. He's currently playing the most snaps on the Rams. He's getting enough targets to be fantasy relevant. I don't see why that can't continue in this matchup. Van Jefferson has done nothing so far this season, so I am sitting him. He has been a big disappointment for this team. He was supposed to step up into that number one receiver role before week one when we saw that Cooper Kupp was not going to be playing and went to IR, but that just did not happen at all. On the Cincinnati side of things, two no-brainer choices for starts here, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Jamar Chase will bounce back, and T. Higgins had that great performance last week. Definitely made up for his 0.0 point performance in week number one. Tyler Boyd is very hit or miss, so I'm not taking the chance in this one and starting him. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Good luck in week number 3. Peace out.